In the spring of 1944, General Eisenhower was convinced that Operation Overlord would bring a quick end to World War II. This operation would take place on June 6, 1944, and better become known as D-Day. This operation brought together the land, air, and sea forces of the Allied armies in what became known as the largest amphibious invasion in military history. The operation delivered 5 naval assault divisions to the beaches of Normandy, France. The invasion force included 7,000 ships and landing craft manned by over 195,000 naval personnel from 8 Allied countries. Almost 133,000 troops landed on D-Day. Casualties from the landing alone totaled to 10,300. On the morning of the attack at the southernmost drop zone, labeled as Drop Zone D and would later become known as the Cursed Zone, the 101st Airborne found themselves in a flooded field. Several men had drowned in the drop and many were wounded. Soldiers began searching for a rallying point in the village nearby. One noticeable structure was the Church of Engaville-aux-Plaines. With its stone structure and wooden benches, this building was quickly set up as an aid station to treat the wounded. Over the next 36 hours, over 80 soldiers would be treated within. Two assistant medics led the operation at the church. Both men were part of the 501st Infantry Regiment dropping at Drop Zone D. Kenneth Moore was 19 years old with 3 weeks of training as a medic, and Robert Wright, 20 years old with 3 months of training. They quickly began collecting wounded soldiers using a 2-wheeled farm cart they found nearby. As the lesser trained medic, Kenneth did most of the solo runs. Upon arrival, Robert Wright took out a flag marked with the International Red Cross and hung it on the door of the church. This would symbolize the church to be a neutral site, treating all soldiers from both sides of the war. The two found the pews as an ideal place to treat the wounded. Initially, they began to treat soldiers where they sat. As more came in, they wished they would have placed the more critically wounded towards the center aisle and those with less serious injuries towards the back. However, what began to take place was those wounded with lesser injuries began to aid those in more critical condition. At one point, the Germans opened artillery fire upon the village and a couple mortars struck the church. One mortar hit the roof and knocked a piece of plaster off the ceiling, striking Kenneth Moore on the head as he was treating a wounded soldier below. He bandaged himself up and went back to work. However, moments later, just a couple steps away, a mortar actually came through the roof, cracking the ground beneath. Miraculously for everyone inside, it turned out to be a dud, and Robert Wright quickly threw the artillery shell out the window. After World War II was over, and the people of Engaville were rebuilding what was left over of their lives in the church building, they replaced and fixed the stained glass that had been shot out. They repaired the hole in the roof from the dud mortar that had pierced through, but when they looked at the pews, they saw many of them covered with bloodstains. The pews where soldiers lay as Robert and Kenneth worked vigorously to treat their wounds. The villagers decided to leave the pews as they were, saying, "This church was constructed over 900 years ago to be a place of hope and healing for the broken and hurting." On D-Day, that is exactly what it was, so we will preserve the bloodstained pews themselves as a memorial to the events that occurred within on that fateful day. So here's the question. Is the image of the bloodstained pews a representation of what it looks like when the church actually gets it right?
Family is gathered around the bed of a loved one who's been injured. One of the family members leans down to their loved one and says, "Listen, our Christian friends are praying, our atheist friends are sending good vibes and feelings, and our lawyers are looking for somebody to sue." Because the truth is we live in a litigious society, right? Now listen, I know it's early on Sunday morning and none of us have kicked our brains into gear yet. Litigious just means that we live in a world where people are constantly looking for somebody to sue and any reason to do it for. I mean, you probably remember when McDonald's got sued. McDonald's got sued because their coffee was hot and somebody got burned because apparently they didn't know. And so now on every cup of coffee that you get, it says, "Warning, hot coffee." right? Contents are hot. That's a little bit of a ridiculous warning. Ridiculous warnings are pretty common. In fact, there's an online competition for ridiculous warnings. One of the winners was a globe that says warning, not for navigational use. Because there's some unbelievable Magellan-like human, right, who's trying to, cross the Atlantic and thinking, we should only be an inch or two away from land, right? I don't think that's how it works, right? There's a warning label on a barbed fishing lure that says, warning, it's harmful if swallowed. I kind of figured that would come with it, but hey, I suppose it needs the warning. But I thought that if you're smart enough to hire a team of lawyers to sue someone over it, you're smart enough to have not swallowed a friggin' fishing lure, right? That's an important thing. How about this one? There's a line, a warning on a drill that says not for dental use, right? That's a pretty ridiculous one. I would have thought that would be obvious also. Now listen, I grew up Baptist, and as a Baptist, we weren't allowed to drink alcohol. There was no alcohol in our home. That's how it worked when I was a kid. So I look forward to getting sick. I look forward to getting sick because you got to take NyQuil. You remember NyQuil? NyQuil is the nighttime sniffly, sneezy, why did I wake up naked in the bathtub medicine. That thing will knock you out, but there's a warning label on it that says, warning, may cause drowsiness. I thought that was the reason they named it NyQuil, but whatever, I suppose that's the deal. Today's message, and really honestly this whole series, should have come with a warning label. We should have up front said to you, like, look, here's the deal, there's going to be something to do. Because warning labels usually are on the outside before you get to the product. But here we're doing it backwards, right? We do a lot of things backwards. We are warning you at the very end. Because we've been walking in through this series called Life Support, where we're talking about the kind of church that we dream of being. We dream of being a church where, and this is what we've been unpacking, we believe that it's a great place. We want to be a church where your story is safe here, no matter how it reads. We want to be a church where it's safe to walk in bloody and bruised and broken from the battle that is ensuing outside. We want people to know that they can come in here and be honest and real. We want people out there to know that when they come in here, their questions don't need to be about the building. I want people to walk around here. We want people to walk around here and go, are these people for real? And I want them to know without a shadow of a doubt that these people are for real because we're honest and real. We dream of being those untrained medics. We dream of a place where you and I get to be those untrained medics kneeling beside broken and bloodied people and helping them find healing and hope. And our church wants to be a place where we are known for our blood-stained chairs, right? Since we don't have pews, But what the warning label should read for this series and for our lives and for our mission as a church is the warning is you and I have to go first. You and I have to be the first people treated before we can treat people. We have to be the kinds of people who are, and this is a hard word for us, vulnerability. We have to be the kinds of people who are familiar with what it feels like to be vulnerable. Vulnerable does not, we've been talking about this, does not mean just telling everyone to everything to everyone, right? I do not dream of a place where we are so open and transparent and honest that you walk up to somebody and say, hey, how are you doing? And instead of just saying fine, which is the only acceptable answer to that question, right? Like, instead of just saying fine, people are like, well, to be honest with you, man, I've really been struggling with porn lately, and man, this drinking thing is kicking my butt. In fact, I'm drunk right now. And can I be honest with you, before you tell me how things are going in your life, I should also tell you that I'm a terrible gossip, right? I do not dream of a place where everyone knows everything about everybody. That's not how this should work, right? Vulnerability is not sharing everything with everyone. Vulnerability is being honest with yourself, and then being honest with God. And then choosing a handful of wisely chosen people that you can invest truth in and be vulnerable and real with. Be willing to bleed in front of. And the truth of it is, if we want people outside to be able to be honest inside, we have to be the kind of people inside who are honest on the outside. I know that's confusing, but I hope that you get that the inside has to come out somewhere. We have to have people who are honest and real with each other. We have to be people who have people we can be honest and real with. And it's not just good for them outside. This is good for us. Because it's not just good for them and it's good for us. It's the call of the gospel. In fact, Jesus said this about his own ministry in Mark chapter 10. He said that for even the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to be, but to not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, most of the time when we talk about service, we talk about stuff we do for people, right? You might think about what you do for the down and out guy, right? What you do or how you care for the folks over here. I mean, just yesterday, our team served around the idea of our serve day with Helping Hands in Humboldt, and we were able to care for people with a mobile food pantry in our community. That's a big deal. And most of the time we talk about serving, that's where we talk about. But the truth is that Jesus served in that way too. But what he did most profoundly in serving was he was vulnerable. Jesus was vulnerable. He was real. He became a person who made himself vulnerable to physical issues. Now remember, can we just kind of back up to this? Jesus is God. He's God with skin on, but he chooses to make himself vulnerable to pain and suffering. He made himself vulnerable emotionally. I mean, think about it. He was betrayed by one of his closest friends. He made himself vulnerable relationally. He wept with his closest friends over what was coming to the cross. I mean, God made himself vulnerable so that people could be real with him. You ever been listening to a speaker like me, somebody up on a platform and they're talking about being vulnerable and honest, and you think they're going to be vulnerable and honest and tell you something real that's going on in your life, and you're not listening, you're not wanting something juicy, you're not wanting to know something behind the scenes, you're just thinking that they're going to tell you something from a platform and you're going to hear it there and go, oh man, my life is normal. I've heard people talk on platforms and then they'll talk about how they need, they struggle with relating to their wife somehow or whatever, and then they'll talk about how, they'll disagree on how to get somewhere at some point, and they'll choose one way and their wife would have chosen the other way, and then their wife rolls their eyes at them. I mean, that's all the vulnerability you get. Now listen, if the biggest struggle in your marriage is that your wife or your husband rolls her eyes or his eyes at you at one point or another, man, I'm really happy for you. I really am. I'm not making fun of it. That's your biggest problem. I'm happy for you. I just want to say something that is not my biggest struggle. Those are not Sheila's biggest struggles, is that I roll my eyes. Sheila's biggest struggles might be my harsh words. It might be the way I snap at people. It might be the short fuse sometimes, or the curt way, or it might be the fact that I sometimes just space out. Can I just be real and honest with you? Our biggest troubles are not that. But we always wind up in places like that, where people aren't honest and real with us, where they tell us their biggest struggle is their wife rolling their eyes. Bigger problems than that. Just last week, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and this friend of mine had worked for years traveling literally almost every day. He was on a plane, at least 5 to 6 days a week, constantly in one city or in another place, selling, working, doing all the things. And about a year ago, my friend was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And I'm not going to get too detailed into it, but with bladder cancer, the treatment process, well, you can't be on a plane in a seatbelt. You need to be within a second's notice, reach of a restroom. And so it took him off of planes, off of traveling, and kind of in a home kind of place for a long time now. And I went from 25 or 30 years of being married and moving every day and being gone constantly, to being home every day. And so I asked him the last week or so, I said, how's that going with you? I mean, how's the transition? He could have just said, oh, good, it's going great, no big deal. But he was honest and vulnerable with me. He said, you know what, I love my wife, she loves me, and we work hard at it. This has been a transition, it's been difficult. We're doing good and it's getting better. But he's like, but our marriage is no romance novel. And I'm like, that's real and honest, right? That's transparent. That's someone willing to bleed in front of somebody else to let them know they care. Can I be honest with you? My mom and dad did a great job of this. My mom and dad did not hide it when they had conflict. I love that, to be honest with you. Some people are like, we don't fight in front of the kids. Can I tell you that's a dumb idea? I mean, I know you might have your rationale and you might disagree with me, and you can disagree with me. It's okay with me. But here's the deal. What my parents did was they modeled for me what it was like to work through really difficult things and really great things. But they modeled that not all of life is really simple and happy, and not everything is easy. It takes work and effort if you want something great. As a result of them modeling how to work through conflict, I have a stronger marriage because I know how to have a good fight, and I know how to make up, and I know how to treat people, figure it out together. Man, that's the truth. What if we were like that? But if we're gonna be the kind of place where people are willing to bleed, we have to be the kind of people who are willing to bleed in front of each other. Now, I'm not saying you gotta get up here and tell every story. I'm not saying you got to do whatever it is you want to do. Like, I'm not saying you have to do everything. I'm just saying that we have to be the kinds of people. It has to be the kind of culture, the kind of place where we're honest and real about stuff. There's a place in Scripture where Paul says something, and I think honestly it's one of those moments where he goes first in front of us, and it gives us this. But when you read it, it might sound a little arrogant. Look at what he says. He says, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." First time I read that, I thought, man, that's kind of arrogant, right? It's a little puffed up, isn't it? I mean, to say, oh, you know what? You little minions you're not worthy of following Jesus for yourself. So why don't you follow me and I'll follow Jesus, right? And it kind of almost has that like little bit of an air of the upper hierarchy of things. Like, you know what? You follow me and I'll do all the listening and I'll tell you what God tells me to tell you. That's not what he's saying. If you read Paul's writings, he's not at all saying, follow me because I've got it all figured out. He's not telling people, I got my poop in a group, you should be right with me. And like, if you're right with me, then you're right with Jesus. That's not what he's saying. Because if you finger and work through all of Paul's writings, you'll see that he's real open and honest. There are some times where he writes about his struggle. In fact, one time he says, listen, I've got this struggle, I got this issue. He calls it a thorn in his side. He said, I've got this thorn in my side. And he doesn't tell exactly what it is. It might be physical, but it probably is moral. It's something he struggles with, and he begs God to take it from him, but God hasn't. And at the end of it, he says, my grace is sufficient. Your grace is sufficient for me. That's a big deal, right? That he goes through and is honest with us about that. There's another place in Romans chapter 7 where Paul kind of sorts out all this problem. He's like, I want to do what's right. I desperately want to do the right thing, but I always wind up doing the wrong thing. He sorts out with us this problem of how he wants to do good things, but he winds up doing bad things. He trains himself to do good things, and he still does the things he doesn't want to do. And at the end of it, he exclaims, who will save me from this wretched body of death? Paul went first, right? He told us about his real life struggles. In one place in Romans 8 where Paul says, listen, here's the deal. There's nothing that can separate me from the love of God. He is always with me. In another place, he says, I'm alone, right? And I'm abandoned. And I don't know what I can do to go on, right? He says, please, let me just run with patience. Let me just finish this race well. Like, these are big deals. Because Paul went first for us. We have to go first for people. Like, we have to be the kinds of people who are willing to bleed in front of other people. I mean, I listen to Paul's stuff and I'm like, that's real talk, right? That's real life stuff played out in front of me. As my kids would say, that's no cap, right? You know, that's a real deal stuff that really matters, and because he goes in front of us. What if we could be that kind of place? You and I are called to be the kinds of people who go first, the kinds of people who are real and honest. Can I be honest with you? There's a hope that I have in life. There's a dream. It's a real honest piece of it is that I want to be the kind of person who says something that makes an impact on people. It's part of who I am, right? And I want to say this. I always think this. Oh, somebody's taking a picture and they're taking a picture of something I said. I'm like, oh man, I hope they get it right. Can I tell you one of my biggest fears is that I would be one of those unknown contributors, right? You ever seen those quotes where like somebody says something and you're like, oh, that's profound, but it says unknown underneath because you don't know who said it? Let me show you one of those. It says this, do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. That's profound. Now, I think that is a profound thing, because it's easy to go where others go, right? It's easy to follow the crowd, but go instead where there is no path and leave a trail for others to find behind you. We don't know who said it, but man, this guy's a leadership genius. He's not a marketing genius, because apparently we don't know who he is, but he is a leadership genius. He knows what it means to lead people. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail behind you. It reminds me of a story in the book of Joshua. Now, you're probably familiar with one other story where God parts the waters, the story of Moses, where the Israelites are coming out of Egypt and they walk up to the side of the Red Sea, and Moses holds up his staff and the water parts left and right and they walk through on dry land. There's another story in Joshua where some people, the people of Israel, are coming up to a place and they're going to camp and they need to cross the Jordan River. And there are no bridges, there are no ways, and it's in monsoon season. It's basically flood season, and their water's just moving through at a rapid pace. It's found in Joshua chapter 3. It says this at the very beginning. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from, okay, let's just stop for 1 second and address the elephant in the room. I don't know how to say this word right here without getting you and I in trouble, right? So I'm just going to say that they set out from, let's just call this a crappy place to camp, right? They went out and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. Okay, so you got the story. They're camping out on the side of the Jordan. Now, everybody knows we come this way, we stop at the edge of the Jordan, and everybody's like, how are we going to get across? I mean, there's no bridges, there's no ferries, there's no ways to get across. And then the story kind of unfolds, right, a little bit, and it says this, and the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all of Israel, so that they may know that I am with you, as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river. Now, you got to stop for 1 second and get a little bit of picture of what's happening here, because it's super important that we understand it. The priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant were under strict orders. They are not allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant. They carry it on big poles so that they're safe and secure from being able to be out. So these 12 guys, one representative from each of the tribes of Israel, carry the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders. Now, the water, it tells us in the next couple of verses, we're not going to land on that one, but it tells us that it is harvest season, so the waters are at flood stage, which means they are rushing. Now, these 12 guys are given a task to carry an item that they can't physically lay their hands on, and their instructions are to go into the rushing river and stand in the water. I don't know about you, but man, if they touch this, they die. So man, they got to be pretty nervous. Like, you want me to go stand in the rushing water? And that's pretty crazy, pretty daunting task. The story goes on like this. And as soon as the priests who carried the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, look at this, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off upstream and stand up in a heap. So what happens is, the first time when God lets the Israelites pass over the crossing of the Red Sea, he parts the waters and they walk through the middle. In this one, he says, I want you to step out here into the story, and I'm going to stop the waters upstream. They'll stop, and this water will pass you by, which means this, that they had to step out in faith, put their feet into the Jordan, and wait for God to show up. Because all of a sudden, God's saying, hey, you step out in faith, and in a minute the water will pass, and you will walk through on dry land. And the story goes on, that they go out into the middle, and they hold this up, and every single person of the Israelites all crossed over on dry land, because God miraculously did something. But you know what happened? They had to go first. They had to go first. They had to step out in faith. They had to trust. They had to do something awkward. They had to have a difficult moment, right? And they had to stand out there, and then they had to wait in the rushing water while God proved that he was showing up. He started showing up, it says all the way up at a city called Adam, up in the beginning of it. And that he stopped it up there at the city of Adam, and it piled up there, and this water that was in there had to flow by first. They had a moment of fear, A little bit of transparency and vulnerability for a moment. So here's the deal. That's pretty amazing. It's what God calls us, is the warning of this whole thing, that we've got to go first, is that you and I have to do that. But it's a daunting task, isn't it? It's a big thing, right? What is it? Where do we even start? I mean, like, what do? Do you like go, I'll just share something from 10 years ago, right? You don't really know what to share. Or maybe it's 10 years ago, it's safe now, right? Or maybe you make something up, right? Like, maybe you feel like you should go, I'll just make something up, or maybe I'll exaggerate something. Well, I don't know what to tell you about those two. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think you should make something up or exaggerate something, or if it should be 10 years ago, or if it should be a recent story, or if it should be a small thing or a big thing. But here's what I do know. Here's what's important. Pick one thing to share with one person. Being transparent and honest, being vulnerable, bleeding in front of somebody is a little difficult. But just pick one thing in your life to share with one person. It's that simple. It doesn't really matter who, and it doesn't really matter what. What matters is that you pick one thing and you share it with one person. It's that quite simple. It's very easy. Pick one thing and share it with one person. Now listen, hold on a second, because you're like, what do I pick, right? There was a research study that they did, where they did it with gourmet jams. They put one table that had 6 gourmet jams on it. And if you tasted all 6, you got a coupon at the end to be able to buy 1 jar of the jam. You could choose from the 6. You just buy one. The other table had 24 gourmet jams. Same deal. If you tasted all 24 gourmet jams, then you got a coupon at the end to buy any one of the 24 gourmet jams. That's a pretty great deal. You know what happened? Most of the people, the vast majority of people, went to the 24 table because there were more things to sample. And very few went to the 6 option table. And what was unique and remarkable about it, what's important for us, is that people went to the 24 option table and only 3% of them bought a jar of jelly. While at the 6 option table, 30% bought a jar of jelly. What does that teach us? That it's human nature to be crippled by the decision, right? That when there are 24 options, people are afraid to choose the wrong one, so they don't choose any one. But when there's only 6, you can remember and you can go, oh, that's the one I like the best, I'll take that one. 30%, 3%. Don't be crippled by the number of options or what to share. Just pick any one thing and to share with any one person. Remember a minute ago I told you about that, my fear of being honest, of just being honest with you about the quote. Being unquote, that's a real fear. That was me being honest with you. It's just my kind of sneaking in a little bit of vulnerability into it, right? Because I just chose one thing to share with, hundreds of people. But here's the thing, just being honest about that. I have this fear as a real person. I stand up here in front of people and I want you to take your next step. Sure, I want what I say to be useful to you. I want you to be closer with Jesus now than you were yesterday. I want all those things. But there's a serious, deep, dark side of me that wants to be recognized for what I do. I did student ministry for 18 years before we started Journey. And I always lamented, I always hated that, I'd spend every week pouring into kids, right? I'd spend every week caring about them, spending time with them. I'd teach our student ministry, and I'd do all those things, and I'd care about what's going on, and I'd be there when they were crying or when they'd break up with somebody and all that stuff. And you know what would happen? Inevitably, I would take kids to camp or a conference, and they would come back telling everybody how God moved at the camp, right? And I'm like, what am I, chopped liver? Right? It's just being real and honest, is that we want to be, I want to be recognized sometimes. And I'm not saying please recognize me, I'm just saying being honest. I'm just choosing one thing to share with hundreds of people, right? The truth is that we have to do what is most difficult. And it's really the words that we've been using since the very beginning of last year. We have to make room. A year ago, right now, right, I came to you as a church and I said, hey, listen, we are running out of space and we need to make room by adding another service. And so I said, hey, I need you guys to reschedule some stuff on Sundays because we're going to go from 2 services to 3. We're going to go from 8:30, 10, and 11:30. Those are going to be, or is that right? To 8:30, 10, and 11:30 are our services. And you have to pick one. They're all different for everybody, right? And so you made room in your schedule. It was amazing, right? We've grown almost 30% in the last year because you made room in your schedule. Then not long after that, I came up and I said, hey, by the way, if we're going to go to 3 services, we're going to need 100 of you to make room in your time. We need you to make some time to serve on one of our serving teams, to be at the greeter at the front door, or help with coffee or kids ministry or all these different things, ushers and greeters, all that stuff, right? And we said, hey, if you'll make time, you'll make room in your schedule first so that we can choose different services. If you'll make room in your time, sacrifice for a minute and be a part of these teams. You know what? Instead of 100 of you, 150 of you signed up to be a part of teams a year ago. You made room in your time. Then this last December, I said, hey, guys, we got to make some room in our kids ministry area. We're out of space, again, even having gone to 3 services, and we need critical kids ministry space. And we can do that by building some offices for our staff out back. And what I thought, hey, you know what? We'll try and figure out how to leverage $50,000 of our resources are kind of like our reserve funds and push those outside. We'll maybe leverage $50,000 and we'll ask our people for 4 weeks, the month of December, to give us $50,000, right? And between the $50,000 that we put in, the $50,000 that they put in, we'll be able to kind of put together this thing. Can I tell you what's awesome? In 6 weeks' time, this church gave almost $100,000 just in our cash. That's amazing. Allowing us to not have to leverage our reserve funds, allowing us to not have to borrow money to do this. I mean, it's a huge, huge value. Now I just got to ask you to make room one more time. Not make room in your schedule, not make room, make some more time for us, or not your money. This one's more difficult. And you're like, what's more difficult than my time, my schedule, and my money, right? I'm already doing all those things. What's more difficult? It's making room for God to move. Because this making room opportunity means that I have to step out in faith. And that I have to be vulnerable. And that I got to be real. Because when I'm real, people outside will come inside and realize that we're not a group of people that used to be people like them. And we're not a group of people who try to fix or change people like them. And we're not a group of people who just put up with people like them. That we're a group of people just like them. That people from the outside will come inside and realize that these people are for real. Because we all have parts of our story that we wish we could change or do over. Parts that we wish we could edit. There are parts of my story that I wish I could do over, like delete and forget they ever happened. But how will people outside know what God's done here on the inside? Unless I'm real and honest, unless I'm willing to bleed. And I'll just say this, I'm willing to make room, not just in my schedule, not just in my time, not just in my finances, but I'm willing to make room in my heart for God to do amazing things in everybody else, because here's the opportunity. When He does that, when I'm real and honest with people, it's not just good for them, it's good for me. It's good for me to be bleeding and broken in front of people, because the only way to find healing for me is to be honest that I'm bleeding and broken. So would you do this with me? Would you make room? Make room for God to move in you so that He can move in our world.